Tashi and welcome to Tibet This Week, where we bring you weekly news edition on Tibet, His Holiness the Dalai Lama and Central Tibetan Administration. Let's have a look at today's headlines. His Holiness the Dalai Lama attends long live prayers offered by former staffs of CTA, Men-Tsee-Khang and former bodyguards. US Congress passes Resolve Tibet Bill heads to President's office. Over 100 candidates for the European Parliament pledge to support Tibet. Central Tibetan Administration welcomes Canadian House of Commons for unanimously passing a motion to support Tibet's right to self-determination. Sikyong Penpa Tsering attends 20th founding anniversary of Central Council of Tibetan Medicine. Sikyong Penpa Tsering and Deputy Speaker Dolma Teykhang launch Autobiography of former Kalon Tashi Wangdi. Tibetans commemorate the 35th anniversary of Tiananmen Square Massacre rally in Manchester. Tibet Initiative Deutschland commemorates its 35th founding anniversary. His Holiness sends greetings. Representative Singey attends ceremony of planting Bodhi tree sapling at Great Stupa of Universal Compassion. Auckland Tibetan Association calls on Prime Minister Lukson to raise Tibet with Chinese Premier Sikyong. WeTech workshop in Canada empowers Tibetan youth advocates. On Tuesday this week, 3 groups of Tibetans made a long life offerings to His Holiness the Dalai Lama. The groups who offered Tenshu to His Holiness the Dalai Lama were representatives from former members and staff of the Central Tibetan Administration, Men-Tsee-Khang, and the Association of Former Bodyguards. His Holiness, during his address, reassured to live up to 110 years and advised the practitioners of the Buddha Dharma to cultivate the awakening mind of bodhicitta, the altruistic aspiration for enlightenment, and an understanding of emptiness which will help make people's lives worthwhile. An estimated 7,000 people attended this ceremony, including 1,900 participants from the 3 groups of patrons. The Resolve Tibet Bill advanced closer to becoming law as the U.S. House passed a suspension motion on the Senate version of the bill on Wednesday this week. The House approved the amended legislation after receiving a vote of 391 to 26. The bill has now moved forward to President Biden's office for final approval. On Tuesday this week, the sponsors of the bill, Representative Jim McGovern and Representative Michael McCall, introduced the bill and urged the members of the House to vote for the bill, along with Representative Bill Keating, who also spoke in strong support of the bill.
Any resolution must include the wishes and voice of the Tibetan people. Tibetans are a democracy-loving people who wish to practice their religion freely and have their own wishes and desires acknowledged. I'm proud to have played a small part in supporting this dream for the Tibetan people. I want to thank Senators Merkley and Young, who passed this bill unanimously through the Senate. And I encourage all my colleagues to push back against the CCP's oppression of the Tibetan people and vote in favor of this bill. And with that,
while Beijing employs these tactics to suppress Tibetan culture, it simultaneously propagates disinformation about Tibet and its history. H.R. 53 calls out Beijing's oppressive tactics and relentless disinformation campaign. This bill reinforces our unwavering support for the Tibetan cause and calls on PRC to engage in genuine dialogue with Tibetan representatives. It also strengthens the Tibetan Policy Act of 2002 by enhancing our public diplomacy efforts to counter PRC disinformation about Tibet. I encourage my colleagues to join me in supporting this bill, and I reserve the balance of my time.
A vote for this bill is a vote to recognize the rights of the Tibetan people, and it is a vote to insist on resolving the dispute between Tibet and the People's Republic of China peacefully, in accordance with international law, through dialogue and without preconditions. So I urge my colleagues to please join me and the distinguished chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee, Mr. McCall, in sending these important messages in solidarity with the Tibetan people.
Europe for Tibet, an online campaign launched in the European Parliament on 9 April this year, ahead of the 6 to 9 June European election, has now concluded after exceeding its target to garner more than 100 pledges from candidates to support Tibet in the European Parliament if elected. A total of 115 candidates from 16 European Union member states have committed to defend the fundamental freedom of the Tibetan people. In addition, a number of political parties have responded to questionnaires taking a position on a number of Tibet-related issues. Representative Rizhi Genka of the Office of Tibet Brussels attributed the success of the campaign to the active participation of the International Tibet Support Groups, VTAG members, SFT and Tibetan communities. The joint online campaign was led by Office of Tibet Brussels, Tibet Interest Group of the European Parliament and ICT with the support of the Office of Tibet in London and Geneva and ITN. On Monday this week, the Canadian House of Commons unanimously passed a motion supporting Tibet's right to self-determination, asserting that Tibetans as a people and a nation possesses this fundamental right. The motion called out China's systematic cultural assimilation of the Tibetans and affirmed Tibetan people's right to freely choose their economic, social, cultural and religious policies without interference from the external powers, including selection of the reincarnation of His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama. The motion was sponsored by the Bloc Québécois and introduced in the House by the MP Alexis Brunel de Soup, member of the Bloc Québécois, like Saint John, Quebec. The Tibetan political leader Sikyong posted on his official X, formerly called Twitter platform, thanked the leaders and all the political parties for their support. On Monday this week, the Central Council for Tibetan Medicine commemorated its 20th founding anniversary with a book launch, the publication chronicling the evolution and achievements of the councils in the gracious presence of Sikyong Tsering. Sikyong, in his keynote address, highlighted the need for strategic planning and emphasized the importance of preparing a proper guidelines to streamline the Central Council of Tibetan Medicine's functions and urged members to identify potential collaborators, both individuals and institutions or organizations who could enhance productivity and provide necessary resources. Sikyong Tsering, along with Deputy Speaker Dolma Teykhang, launched Tashi Wangdi's autobiography, My Life, Born in Free Tibet, Served in Exile, at the Library of Tibetan Works and Archives in Dharamshala on 7 June. In his keynote speech, Sikyong Tsering shared the story of his first encounter with former Kalon, Tashi Wangdi. He commended Tashi Wangdi for his over 4 decades of service to the Tibetan people. Deputy Speaker Dolma Teykhang also acknowledged the lifelong dedication and service of former Kalon Tashi Wangdi to the cause of Tibet. She also commended the author for his decision to write his autobiography following the advice of His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama. Kalon Noziruma from the Department of Information and International Relations, secretaries from the Central Tibetan Administration, secretaries from Office of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and former Central Tibetan Administration dignitaries and bureaucrats also graced the book launch event. On the occasion of the 35th anniversary of the Tiananmen Square massacre, Tibetan community in Manchester led a rally in the St. Peter's Square to support on 4th June. The event brought together groups from Hong Kong, Taiwan, Georgia, the Uyghur community, and Ukraine, each united in their stand against tyranny and aggression. Similarly, the Tibetan community supported an exhibition titled From the Mothers of Tiananmen to the Daughters of Hong Kong, Tibet, Uyghur and Taiwan was organized in Manchester by Mei Yuk Huang, the artist from Hong Kong. The Tibet Initiative Deutschland celebrated the 35th founding anniversary in Berlin, Germany on 8 June with a greeting message from His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Tsering from the Tibet Bureau read the message from His Holiness the Dalai Lama before the gathering during the celebration. In the message, His Holiness the Dalai Lama thanked and acknowledged the remarkable contributions of the Tibet Initiative Deutschland to the cause of Tibet, including its unwavering support for the preservation and promotion of Tibetan culture. The premier Tibet support group in Germany, Tibet Initiative Deutschland, was formed in 1989 to stand in solidarity with the Tibetan movement for freedom and justice. Representative Singey of the Office of Tibet in Canberra attended the historic occasion of the sacred Bodhi tree sapling planting ceremony at the Great Stupa of Universal Compassion at Bendigo in Australia on 9 June. The event was co-organized by the Great Stupa of Compassion and Bodhidharma Vihara Bendigo to mark the planting of the first ever authenticated Mahabodhi tree sapling brought from Sri Lanka to Australia. The Auckland Tibetan Association has sent a letter to the New Zealand Prime Minister requesting to raise Tibet during the Chinese Premier Teykhang's visit to the island country. The Auckland Tibetan Association urged the Prime Minister not to be silenced by China and be complicit in their moral and ethical deprivation. The association drew attention on the forced relocation and protests of Tibetans in Teykhang County over the planned massive hydro dam by the Chinese government, severe political repression, social discrimination, economic marginalization, environmental destruction, cultural assimilation, and China's sinicization campaign in Tibet right now. The two-day workshop focused on empowering Canadian Tibetan youth and VTAG members was held to improve their advocacy skills and tools, marking a significant step forward in amplifying the voices of Tibetan youth on the global stage in their Tibetan advocacy work. Representative Dr. Namgyal Chitup and Chinese liaison officer Tsuldum Gyaltso from the Office of Tibet in Washington, along with Tenzin Kunken, a staff at the Tibet Advocacy section of DIR, presided over the training-cum-workshop. The workshop was led by Dr. Tashi, Research Professor of International Affairs at the Elliott School, Pinzo Wamo, who works as the Constituency Assistant in the Office of Honorable Ari Virani, Gabriel Konza, Director of the International Policy, Canadian Chamber of Commerce, and Sherab Tharjin, Executive Director of the Canada-Tibet Committee. The spokesperson shared their presentation on the power of Tibet, overview of the Canadian Parliament, the significance and the role of the Parliamentary Friends of Tibet, as well as avenues for lobbying in the Canadian Parliament and business interests to align with advocacy interests. On Monday this week, VTAG Canada, in close collaboration with Tibetan NGOs such as Regional Tibet Youth Congress, Students for Free Tibet and others, took part in a lobby at Ottawa, meeting honourable members of Parliament who have been great supporters of the Tibetan cause in the Canadian Parliament. That is all the news for this week's edition of Tibet This Week. Thank you so much for watching.